Hello, this is Dale Matthews. I'm joined by Mike Jones, and this is not a boring show. Right. Now,
Yeah, we'll
look.
see. We'll see about
All
that.
right. So, there, at least, I think all the candidates so far for county commissioner are concentrating on things that center around land use, planning, single issue candidates. We've got a couple of them, and that's what their thoughts are about. It's about economic development. Everybody's talking economic development because we're not going to have a sheriff. We're not going to have some of those other freedoms and things that you might want unless we've got some money flowing in this county. And just like with the city, like with Grants Pass City, it concentrates on things like the codes that they set up. So if you want to start a new business or even expand a business, that you have to do a bunch of standing on your head. You're going to, oh, you need to put in new sidewalks, and you need planters and concrete and this that. I mean, the system development charges at the city are horrendous, and it stops a number of companies from locating here
Of
or
course it
from
does.
or from building. Now, the county doesn't have system development charges. And they don't have, as the city does, Grants Pass City has something where you have to get a business license so they can decide whether or not you get to do business. The county does not have a business development business licenses. Okay, well, they were talking about that the other day, and we've talked about that with you. But oh, well, it's not really a business license; it's some other kind of license. Yeah, it's a business license.
Yeah.
But
Well,
what
so
we do,
far, County 2, City 0 in my book.
that's right. So, but what we do have is we have a land use compatibility statement, and they're
Mm.
talking about a new ordinance, land use compatibility, that regulates time, place, and manner. Don't leave us now. It regulates time, place, and manner. So the county has control over that, tight control of that. It all goes through planning. You're not going to get your new place for the cats and dogs to stay while they're waiting for someone to pick them up. If that's your hot button, you're not going to get mills opened back up. If that's your hot button, you're not going to get Meals on Wheels kind of things done. If that's your hot button, you get none of those things unless the county government, unless these three commissioners agree that they like the time, place, and manner of what you're doing on your own property.
Hmm.
Now,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I just object to the whole concept.
Yes. But we've got to keep track of these guys for another year. We have no choice. We've got to keep track of them for another year. And so that means every time they start talking about another ordinance, and it's coming on this subject, and every time something comes up on these issues, we need to watch them like a hawk. Speaking of watching them like a hawk, I just want to explain we are not going to be talking right now about the goings on at the Ivy Airport this afternoon. We're going to need to do a lot of stuff with videotape and editing and all that. We're going to bring you that story tomorrow because there's a big story that also it goes to time, place, and manner about sound and audio levels and that kind of stuff surrounding the airport and IV. We will bring that to you tomorrow as quickly as we can. But let me mention that Wally Hicks has recently said that the board can pass an ordinance, the Board of County Commissioners can pass an ordinance regulating time, place, and manner without a vote of the people. Really? Thank you, Wally Hicks. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the whole time, place, and manner thing needs broader definition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of definition, okay, so one of the things that's happening here, and look, I don't want to come across as Johnny One Note on this, but the reason that the county commissioners and a lot of other people are now looking at regulations, ordinances, time, place, and manner has all come up because of this unusual thing about marijuana growing. Why isn't it just treated like some other farm crop? Well, it's not. Okay. And so it's kind of like Nazis come into town, right? Well, then suddenly everybody's talking about First Amendment. It's kind of like, the commissioners are found guilty of breaking the law. Well, now everybody's talking about breaking the law, and do you have the First Amendment? Will it protect you when you point out that they broke the law? Normally, it's not going to come up. But when you've got something like marijuana coming up, then suddenly now people are saying, hey, I'd really like to start, some kind of facility here in this industrial zone. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, our rules don't allow you to do that. Well, why don't they allow you to do that? If this is a growing industry and I want to grow something in an industrial zone, what's it to you? Well, it means a lot to the commissioners. And recently they've been saying, well, we've not been standing in the way of everything or anything. But then, when it comes down to harvesting and drying and packaging and labeling and all the rest of that, that's called processing. And that may not be possible unless the county commissioners say that it's possible. And maybe you're going to like that, right? Oh, I would rather see halt put on this. Yeah, but then they're also telling people what they can do with their own private property.
Listen, if you're putting the kibosh on that stuff, you're just sending whatever has to do with that out of this county. That's all. You're not stopping it from happening. People are still going to grow here, but they're just going to process and package and do it somewhere else.
Well, let me tell you some of the strange things that have come out of this. Just the most recent meeting we had this Thursday, and the planning guy is there. Now, most of the time, honestly, sorry, I find the planning guy kind of boring. I'm sorry, I kind of do, okay? But he's talking about fence height. Fence height, that's sort of boring too. Okay. We've got a rule in Josephine County that your fence height around a crop or whatever you want can only be as high as 7 feet. Any higher than that, you need to get a special permission from the county, and you need to fill out forms, and you need to do engineering study, a whole bunch of stuff, right? Engineering study? Well, the state says, and this is how this thing got kicked into higher gear, the state says if you're going to grow marijuana, you need to have an 8-foot fence. What was that difference? An 8-foot fence.
Yes, that's
well,
yes.
You can't do that, Josephine County. You can't have an 8-foot fence unless you go to someone that's an engineer, and he has to engineer your extra foot.
Love it. Yes, and it's going to cost you.
Yeah, so you have to go in for a special development permit, or you can't obey the state law. And they're arguing about a foot. This is the craziness that's come up. And it's not the fault. It's really not the fault of the people who want to take advantage of this new industry. It points out things that have always been a problem with our rural land development code. And this thing is poking it. And now you say, well, no, wait a minute. What are we going to do about this?
Well, listen, I'll tell you what's going to happen with that. The state wants the revenue. That law is going to change, and it will.
Somebody's law has to change. Either theirs has to change or ours has to change.
Yeah. Well, no. Listen, either theirs will change or they will put pressure on. Believe me, they want this money. They don't want anything hindering this money. So they will. This will magically disappear. Do you just watch?
Well, now we're going to start playing some videotape for you, and the first thing that we're going to play, you've seen this 1,000 times. Simon Hare arguing both sides of the same issue from diametrically opposed points of view, all during the same conversation. So we'll start off. I know we've seen how many times. It starts off where Simon Hare is talking about allowing certain kinds of production, certain kinds of growing in commercial and industrial zones. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm thinking about fixing the code to allow production, nursery production, potentially in commercial and industrial zones. Unless I have a reason, and nobody's presented one, why that shouldn't be.
Okay, unless he has a reason why it shouldn't be. Well, okay, that makes plenty of sense. So now
he's
we're going
to tell us why, right?
So now we're going to go on, and we're going to listen to more of their conversation. We'll let them do most of the talking, but you're going to see a number of times in here where he's saying, "What? What?" Okay, let him talk.
It doesn't make any sense to me, without any other kind of a reason, why you couldn't do production in commercial, community, industrial, and industrial. It seems like a no-brainer. So nursery, minus the marijuana industry, is the leading agricultural commodity in the state of Oregon. It's probably permitted in most every other part of the state in this kind of zone. And the other inconsistency that I see is laboratories for testing being done at the retail establishment. They're similar. It would make sense to be able to do both under one roof, and
Yes.
that could be accomplished.
Testing along with the retail.
Mhm.
I think that might be a conflict.
She is right. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My reading of 3400. And I confirm this for you, but I think laboratories would not be allowed in those circumstances.
Under 3400 anyway, even if our land use law permitted it.
Yes.
Because the laboratories are verifying the quality of the meat processors and what
So
they're
it could be
selling.
construed as a conflict of
Yeah.
interest if they're under.
No, it's not.
Yes. So
Unless they were testing for somebody else's growth or whatever. I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, well, I'm gonna say this is where there needs to be some level agreed upon playing field that makes sense, common sense. And it's not specific to the product, it's specific to the code.
No.
That kind of stuff.
They're all verifiable.
Yeah.
You can't cheat on your own
Sure.
stuff. If you can cheat on that, you cheat on everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could see it like peripherally, tangentially, but in my mind, if I was going to put something together, I would put a retail and a laboratory shop under the same roof. And, you're doing one thing out one door and you're doing something out the other door. And it just seems to make sense from a security issue, a whole host of different issues, but whatever. So that one can stay. The big one for me is this, the production element being allowed in commercial and industrial.
The only reason I didn't put it in is because all the other zones specified farm or agriculture,
Yeah.
but it was absent in those two zones.
Right.
I don't know if it's verifiable to deny that use in that zone because of the Right to Farm Act. I mean,
No, it
how
doesn't
would that
affect
play
this.
in?
No.
That-
I don't think agriculture is not an outright permitted use
No,
In that
in
zone.
that zone.
I don't think
Is that right?
It's not listed at all. Farming is
No
not listed in
production.
those two zones, whereas it's listed in every other zone.
there's like use listed in every other zone.
Okay.
Oh, it's
Outright, yeah.
explicitly listed.
There is processing in industrial, community industrial or industrial relative to the meat packing, and that's agricultural processing.
We talked about that in terms of the community commercial or
That's not
the
production.
rural commercial.
We're
That
all on the same page of doing what? We're all on the same page doing what? Discussing what?
Sorry.
Well, we're not all on
Okay,
the
you were
same
thinking-
page, apparently.
No.
we at prior meeting we had that discussion about
Yeah.
whether or not we could do a similar use determination of processing in the rural commercial or the community commercial, because there hidden down the list there was this meat processing.
Right. Isn't that the
outright
same?
permitted use, and I think the conclusion is that yeah, we missed that when we had the first opportunity to allow that, making a similar use determination, and we concluded that we shouldn't miss the next opportunity. And it's really a question of whether there needs to be a board order that basically clarifies or endorses the planning director's limited use determination, so that it makes it a universal thing rather than having to do it on a case-by-case basis.
Planning is the stranglehold.
What I suggest is
Economic
longer
development.
term.
You know what? I mean, see, this is the kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff that makes people go, I don't want to have nothing to do with that. And they just go, yeah, and then it's only the people who really persevere through all of this stuff that ultimately end up plowing through and getting permitted or something. But that kind of stuff, why not just go, listen, either we're going to allow this stuff or we're not going to allow this stuff. Oh, we're going to allow it. Okay, we're done. I mean, what would be so hard? Why does this have to be all that complicated?
Well, when anybody ever talks, this is not boring. This should not be boring, because this is directly linked to economic development. Economic development has to run through planning. And if you can't get that camel through the eye of the needle, you're not going to have any economic development at all. And what these guys are doing is they're saying, if you want to do anything in our county, it's not going to involve the sheriff. It's going to involve planning. And if they don't say no, if they don't say yes, there's not going to be any planning. You're not going to get a chance for economic development. It all goes through them. This is the stranglehold or encourage. And when people talk, even us, when we said, well, what can we do to encourage development? Well, cut back on the paperwork. Planning. Well, what can we do to, make it so that the fees aren't as high? Planning. It all originates in planning. This is where this is like Thursday meetings. Well, Thursday meetings are boring. Thursday meetings are where the action happens. Planning. The planning department. That's the ultimate goal for everybody to get through there. You can't do economic development without getting through planning. Right. Keep going, Mike. Keep going, bud.
It seemed to me that because of the potential negative impacts for that use, meat processing or some other agricultural processing, it probably didn't belong in permitted uses anyway. It belonged over in conditional uses, and so it deserved to be moved there and
rewritten. You get to pick and choose under conditional uses.
Processing, so that you could include the marijuana processing and some other agricultural processing. But that's going to take us months to get there, and
it's going to take months.
Similar use.
Yep.
We can get there. We can also look at this matter of whether or not production is in some way a permitted use in the commercial or industrial zones, by whether or not there is any way that you could make a similar use. The only way it looks like is you got to connect it to the greenhouse thing that Grace was mentioning. That
greenhouse thing, Mike.
Greenhouse. Why?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the deal about greenhouses. This is another crazy part of this plan. You can have a greenhouse, and in the greenhouse, you can sell retail marijuana. Okay, I know this is about marijuana again, but this shows you the craziness of the rules. Here locally, you can sell marijuana, you can wholesale marijuana from a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't use it to grow marijuana in an industrial zone. Now, why would you have a greenhouse if you're not going to grow anything in it?
Yes, and again, I think it's very, very important that you, although we're talking about marijuana, try to remove marijuana from what this and insert any business venture you could possibly imagine.
Tomatoes. Imagine you can sell tomatoes, you can wholesale
but you
tomatoes,
can't grow them
but you can't grow them in a greenhouse.
Yes. No, I'll tell you, this is the killer. You're right about this being the bottleneck of economic development, and it's just that's just ridiculous for him to say, well, it's going to take us months to get to a place. Really? Why? Because you have to go through certain processes to analyze the whole thing, or it takes that long for you to make a decision about something. I mean, why wouldn't you say, pardon my French, heck yes, we want this business in our community, and not necessarily referring to marijuana, but anything.
Make it
happen.
Again, every time that people have talked about us, of course, us and others have talked about how can we level the economic playing field? How can we attract people? How can we encourage business development? Well, let's cut back on the paperwork. This is where the paperwork happens.
Clearly.
This is not boring. Clearly. This is planning.
Yeah, this is, well, it is boring, but it is, I think it's intentionally boring, because it's just like the, what do they call it? Anyway, purposefully vague.
Purposely vague. That's right. I remember that phrase. I was there. Yes.
Yeah. Just this kind of stuff. is maddening.
Yes.
I went to add on. I wanted to add 1,000 square feet to my building, and the building had just been built in 2002. So I thought, well, this is going to be no problem. I went down there. I spent a lot of money. I had the plans drawn up, and they were in city plan check, and the city plan checker sends the thing back to me and says, well, you need to have an engineer, look at this, the rest of your building and certify that, it meets this particular code. I go, oh, really? Is that the code now? Yeah. How long has it been the code? Oh, about 8 years. Oh, really? Well, my building was built in 2002. It doesn't matter. Have to do it. Really? Really? Clearly my building went through plan check less than 2 years ago, and this has been done in it. And yet I've got to, redesign this whole thing, take it to an engineer, which is a step above having some guy who's drawing plans for you, and have the whole thing. It's probably going to cost $5,000 for me to do that. I said, the heck with it. I'm not even going to do it. So
this is the stranglehold
Yeah.
on economic development.
Right. No, this is clearly it.
Okay, next clip.
Why would you just keep wholesaling out of the greenhouse if you're not producing also in the greenhouse? So, but that's certainly one of the inconsistencies that we're seeing in the code.
So, what would be some examples of commercial industrial zone here right now?
Well,
North Valley Industrial Park.
North Valley Industrial Park. They're usually that mix.
The mill.
Yeah.
Out there in Merlin.
There's one out in Williams, the old on Powell Creek Road. Pretty big one.
We want to have a limited number of industrial sites, but rural commercial is.
Just thinking, because for somebody to farm that, if everybody's simply farming it, not necessarily product specific, but farming it, that would be a pretty stiff hurdle to cross. I mean, just from a ag standpoint.
Yeah, I don't think really commercial zone is much of an issue, because it seems to me the nature of commercial parcels, commercially zoned parcels, tend to be small, the smaller ones, 1 to 5 acres at the most, and they're along the high main roads.
Just like R5.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just kind of naturally people are not likely in most commercially zoned properties going to want to grow or need to grow in there. But, Wally pointed out something, I think, that you don't have to do a similar use, at least for production.
Oh, I was pointing out, I'm looking at page 11 of the recently produced State of Oregon Business Readiness Guidebook for the Recreational Marijuana Operations. I have it here. And anyway, it simply says in regards to production that aside from EFU or resource forest and mixed
exclusive farm use,
mixed farm, that it's at the county's discretion.
At the county's discretion.
In other words, you do have the discretion.
In other words, you can't do it.
Allow production
unless you got a friend.
Industrial.
So we all need to understand this. Okay, I know it's a little tough going. We need to understand this. This is the place where the rubber hits the road. This is what it's all about. Now, you've heard Simon Hare say that he would be in favor of allowing more production of more things inside of a commercial industrial zone. Let's hear a little bit more from Simon Hare. I believe that's next.
The reason that I just, in my mind, determined why this isn't allowed in an industrial zone, because it isn't considered the highest and best use.
Huh?
There are alternative places where people could do nursery stuff where there isn't an alternative. So you brought up the point where we have very limited industrial land.
Yeah.
And so if you allocate it to this use, you're foregoing the opportunity for more intense uses where there isn't another substitute for that.
Right.
But you could put a nursery and a greenhouse on EFU anywhere. You can't do everything you do on industrial on ag.
Well, what great thinking there. And the best part about that is people are pounding down the doors to get into commercial industrial areas, and there just isn't enough to go around for this growth industry. Really? Now, let's hear what more he has to say on this subject.
At the end of the day, though, we're talking about private property rights and whether or not, if you look around, we've got properties that have sit vacant since the mill that was there before left, more than my lifetime ago. How long should we make people wait for something that may not happen here when you've got something beating down these people's doors right now that's going to be a revenue generator for those pieces of property? How can you...
Okay, so Mike, please summarize Simon Hare's position on this subject.
Well,
anybody?
He was all over the map here. He was for it. He was against it. He was, hey, let's let him have Merlin. The problem I see is that too much of the decision making is in the hands of
people that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, in the hands of people who have no stake in the thing. It's like if I wanted to grow Christmas trees on this piece of property, and you got nothing else going on, and that's going to generate some revenue that is ultimately going to benefit somebody. Why wouldn't you just let it happen? For crying out loud. Now, I understand there are a number of factors that exist with marijuana in this particular case that don't exist with some other things like the smell. I mean, Ashland, who had apparently made it completely legal, the cultivation thing before, is second guessing it now because of the complaints that they're getting on, the smell of this stuff. So, I guess, that's going to play out how it plays out. But if you have
wait, just a second. How do you feel about the smell in an industrial zone? Really?
But that's different though.
And that's what they're talking about here. Let's allow it in an industrial zone.
Right. Yeah, you know what? Listen.
There's such controversy.
They're going to have to find some place to, for this to work. But if you take marijuana out of it and the smell problem that goes along with out of the situation, you're just talking about Joe's Roofing Company or something like that.
With tar on Joe's Roofing Company. Smells horrible.
Okay, but they're not roofing their own building every day.
But they're storing the stuff in there, or they're warming it up.
Typically you warm it up on the job site.
Okay.
So I don't know, but that's something to think about also. But because of the fact that it smells, does that mean that you then not allow these people to operate in a commercial industrial zone? Don't you expect that maybe you might smell something having to do with manufacturing or having to do with whatever it is the business is that is
in a commercial industrial zone? I would think so.
Yes, it tends to go. No, you know what? This kind of stuff makes me crazy. I know that there's probably people watching this going, yeah. Hey, cut those guys off at the pass. They probably are, and this is how democracy works, I guess.
Well, or they're saying, hey, I want economic development. I just don't want that kind of economic development.
Right. And that's this is that's why it comes down to politics. Generally speaking, if it's legal, there's a lot of people, a lot of conservatives who would say, tobacco, they've been doing everything they can to screw over tobacco companies. It's a legal product. Why don't you get the hell out of the way and let them do what they're going to do? And listen, it isn't as though we haven't broadcasted far and wide. I think everybody knows that smoking's bad for you. Okay.
That's right.
They pretty well understand that. So, but you're still going to have people that are hardline on that and say, hey, no way. That's killing everybody and it's bad and you're marketing it to children and all kinds of stuff,
Think about the children.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be an issue. So, six of one, half a dozen of the other. I'm saying, generally speaking, if you're talking about something that's legal, why don't you try and, unfortunately,
get out of the way. Get out of the way.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But unfortunately, I believe, generally speaking, that people that are involved in government, who are involved in the they would be the ones streamlining the thing. Well, yeah, that's like asking a turtle to run faster. It just it doesn't work, and this is the problem. This is the problem that the whole country has this problem.
Well, we don't have any more time for more videotape, but I wanted to introduce one last concept to this, and that is, in Jackson County, they have what they call fully formed law enforcement, but they're not going to enforce any of these laws there because they say we're not going to dedicate our law enforcement officials to doing this because they don't have enough for that. Now, we're in a different position here in Josephine County. Who the heck is going to enforce all these zoning laws on marijuana, tomatoes, or any other thing?
Mm-hmm.
You make all the rules that you want, down to the tiniest little detail. Who's going to enforce them? Cheryl Walker? You know she'd like to. You know she's chomping at the bit to do that.
Oh, I think they'd probably come up with some sort of code enforcement division. Listen, every single piece of local government smells marijuana money. Yeah. And they want to find out how to get a piece of it. And I would be willing to bet that the best way that you could streamline whatever process you're doing related to this business in this county is to come in there and start spreading a lot of money around.
Well, I know how to enforce it, and I know how Cheryl and Simon can get involved. And that is, they take those deer that did their bidding and eating up all of those hemp plants that were illegal. Mm-hmm. And if you cross the line and you don't have an 8-foot fence, they're going to send the deer to eat up all your marijuana.
Yes.